a pain many of you will feel. I've been admin for a Pathfinder group for about 4 years now, since solidly before the lockdowns. Frequency has varied, but usually every week or every other week. We started at level 4 and are currently level 16. We have grown from trudging across the rural countryside in a wagon to scouring the depths of literal hell with that same wagon. It's been places, man. We have built up stories, plots, characters. We have numerous running gags. A player that had to step away has returned for the final stretch. I have plans for the conclusion of many plot lines, literally about to happen. I have a big thing ready to go involving a gag from the entire campaign long and a false Hydra. They are literally on the verge of bargaining with Asmodeus and killing a god. Over the past year, scheduling conflicts have increased. Players have started ghosting on sessions and apologizing after for oversleeping or something. Quite a bit of talk, but session after session gets called off. I'll claim next session happens even with only one of you. Then the one who does show never signs on because no one else says they are ready. It feels like some have lost interest and others have lost availability and all have lost accountability. We haven't played in months. I've actually given up at this point. I've stopped asking. It pains me. We were this close. I could wrap this whole campaign up in 34 sessions. And I've told them this. Then, nothing. I know it's not as dramatic as a lot of the stories on here. But in my eyes it's a very real and very relatable horror. Guess I just needed to vent. AITA, or am I being screwed? Me, DM Barbarian. Problem player 1 Bard. Problem player 2 Wife to problem player 1 Fighter. PC brother to problem player 1 Paladin. PC Wizard. PC. I will try to be brief, and I'm sorry if this is long. This is my first Reddit post and I really want to explain to the best of my abilities. We are running an intermediate session where the players are LVL10 and are fighting legendary monsters. I told them to optimize because survival is important. This was all agreed upon as a game we wanted to do. The day before the session starts, Barbarian asked me if his wife Bard can join. I say sure, I don't want to exclude anybody, but I warn that this will be a tougher campaign. He says it's not a problem, and then when the day comes she has never played D&D before and hasn't even made her sheet. Well, we spent the next 4 hours helping her while the Barbarian sat on his phone looking at memes. We got 2 hours in the campaign and she said she needed to take a nap, so we had stopped that day. Next week rolls by and when we pull up to where we are supposed to meet, which is the Barbarian's house, the Barbarian and Bard say they will be there shortly. After 30 minutes they apologize they were late, but they were in the middle of Mario Party. After about an hour, the Bard pulls out her laptop to play Rune Escape, full blast. I told her not to do that. The Barbarian continues to play on his phone, lose track of initiative, and show a lot of PDA, making the group uncomfortable. Next week and again they are late, and in combat the Bard falls unconscious because she doesn't know how to play. She then cries and asks why I would do this to her. The Barbarian doesn't do anything about his wife, but the fighter tries to calm her down. This stopped the session for the day. Next time we play, the Wizard and Paladin are doing all the heavy lifting. And the Barbarian complains that he doesn't have any spell utility, even though he knows that Barbarians are purely martial. On top of all of this, they will cancel last minute, make out in the middle of sessions, interrupt people while they are Peter show memes, talk loudly amongst themselves, and complain if things aren't going their way. How do I address this? I worked really hard on this campaign. Edit. Update. I confronted Barbarian, and he said he understands why I would be upset, and he feels bad. He asked if I would reconsider having him leave, and I said he has one more chance. The Bard however didn't understand where she went wrong, and said that it's just a game. The Barbarian however stepped in. I just wanna thank everyone for the positive feedback. Unsure why I deserve that. This happened a few years ago, so I dropped them long ago. Im26 joined an online session just before COVID started getting rampant for the first and last time, and was invited by, let's call her JF26. We met a few times DT through mutual friends. We have a bar here called Villains that does D&D related stuff and I saw her there too to my surprise. So I hop on Discord on agreed day and meet her friends. They all seemed nice and were a part of her sorority and told me some funny stories. The DM came on last and said hello to everyone and he noticed I was in and asked who I was. I felt kinda singled out, but Jay explained she invited me. Since they are work friends I guess he just let it go. The DM then seemed fun and the 6 of us kicked off. We started in a typical you're in prison scenario. Get out. I played a rogue, so I thought perfect my skills would be useful here. The DM quickly exclaimed that I wasn't there and not to interrupt. We just kinda laughed it off. After they got out no problem, it was my turn and apparently I was in a deeper part of the prison and I was being tortured. Shackled by my hands and feet and gagged. Being poked with sticks by guards. The worst part is that he said I didn't have any chance to escape since I was bound therefore prone. They do horrible things to me and then he kills my character. I was so confused and didn't know why I deserved that. Just kicked out a player from our group. We just recently kicked out a player for a number of reasons. They are very flaky with attendance. This problem ramped up recently, but it has been an issue for a while now. The last straw was last week, when they said in the morning that they'd be there, and when it came to game time they decided otherwise. Sometimes when they do show up they'll want to leave the session an hour early, and they get offended when we decide we want to keep playing. They don't pay attention in game, unless the story is focused on them. For this point I do have sympathy since they do have ADHD. But it became disruptive especially in combat, when they take 10 minutes on their turn. Not to mention unfair to our DM. They'll randomly go on 15-minute tangents and anecdotes in the middle of the game. They never level up at the same time as the rest of the party at the end of the session. And instead level up during the start of the next session, while we've already started, disrupting the game. They are very sensitive. We all talked about it, and agreed that we felt like walking around eggshells whenever we talked to them. We made a group chat and talked about it, and thought it was best for them to be removed. None of us dislike them as a person, which is why it took us so long to kick them out. I think no one wanted to be that guy. Not allowing an immortal familiar is apparently completely nerfing his character. This is a shorter story about a player I had in a campaign I run. I will name him Yardam, and this is one of many stories I have about this guy. The crux of the issue is that Yardam kept trying to inject overpowered homebrew into the campaign and would get upset when I would tell him he couldn't do it. He had this familiar robot spider that he also used as his spiritual weapon. I have no inherent issue with this, and for the most part there were no issues. Until a certain combat encounter presented itself where he was doing a lot of damage with his familiar. Yardam had initially summoned the spider as a spiritual weapon, but then started casting spells through it. The spider was just ripping into enemies, rolling consistently high damage with Yardam casting spells through it as a familiar. As a result of this, I rolled that one of the enemies got really annoyed and aimed at the spider. Yardam then told me that I couldn't target the spider since it was a spiritual weapon. I explained to Yardam that sure, he had initially summoned the spider as a spiritual weapon, but I pointed out that he had been using it as mostly a familiar as he was casting spells through this. That meant that it was currently a familiar and could be targeted. I then explained that if you're using your familiar / spiritual weapon and you use it to cast spells, in that round it's currently a familiar and can be targeted. This would not end its function as a spiritual weapon, but it wouldn't be able to function as a familiar until you go through the standard processes of resummoning it. Yardam apparently wasn't okay with this and accused me of going out of my way to completely nerf his character. I responded telling him I'm not nerfing his character, I'm just not going to allow a player to have an immortal invulnerable familiar that they can have give the help action and cast spells through because that's overpowered. He pouted for the rest of the session and afterwards made some really passive aggressive comments about how controlling I am. I just rolled my eyes at him and this was the beginning of the end for him. He eventually rage quit out of the campaign mid-combat because he failed a concentration check on a spell. TLDR. Player pouts and accuses me of completely nerfing his character because I won't let him have an immortal invulnerable familiar. Self-proclaimed optimized healer forgets to heal, leading to my character's death. So I'm on a server with about a dozen friends or so, all of whom play D&D. We run several games with different DMs and players on different days. Most of us are pretty friendly, but one of my friends added in a new guy, a friend of his, Zane. I've played with him in one other game, but scheduling meant we hadn't really interacted much, so I didn't know what he was like as a player. So when a friend, Charlie, expressed a desire to start Ming, we all thought it would be cool to invite Zane. His first character set off a few red flags, which Charlie and I discussed between sessions, a homebrew race of Zane's own design that got natural armor, fire resistance, poison immunity and a terribly wooded innate spellcasting that implied he had cure wounds at will. I warned Charlie there could be some balance issues. But thankfully there ended up not being many owing to Zane playing dangerously and dying a few sessions in. His next character was a reborn healer, which consisted of 1 life cleric and 4 alchemist, which he had optimized to never let anyone die again, a sentiment Charlie agreed with, since he was still new to encounter balance. For a while it was all fine and dandy, but I did notice Zane rarely used healing spells, or in fact any features besides inflict wounds. And when the wizard got a fun boon to cast some druid spells he ended up healing significantly more. This, in conjunction Zane's insistence to keep going into melee despite having very little survivability, meant the marshals were often frustrated when they were injured and in need of healing. This all came to a head last session, where Charlie threw us up against a nasty monster with the ability to create areas where you couldn't move until someone pulled you out, and had the capability to do large amounts of ranged damage. As a rogue, I hid and started shooting the enemy, while the rest of the party, including our melee fighter Evan, were unable to move and started getting whittled down every turn. Evan tried to persuade Zane to drag him out, which the DM said could break the effect and was only 5 feet away, while Zane kept doing nothing besides cast Chill Touch every turn. Eventually I needed to take a shot that left me exposed, which led to a failed dex save knocking me down, which would have been all well and good, but despite my pleads Zane kept using Chill Touch. 3 failed death saves later, we realized Zane had been incredibly quiet, so when we listened we heard snoring. He'd fallen asleep. Naturally we weren't very pleased, but by now it was the end of the session. We haven't talked yet, but the next session is tonight, and I'm wondering how he's gonna explain himself. I play an archer, GM converts me to a monk. We had a new campaign and a different GM, so I wanted to try out something different from the norm. An archer sounded like an interesting challenge, so I built one. Tracking my ammo, scouting to plan combat, inevitably getting killed in close combat, because I literally don't have a second weapon. I was ready for the whole thing from start to death. The first game day we have the party is magically split up, so I climb a tree to look for them. Naturally the embodiment of death appears in front of me and plucks out my eyes. I'm now a blind archer. I hear a pack of rabbit dogs apparently coming up to me, so I do the only thing that makes sense, now that I'm worse than useless, and fall out of the tree to lay down and let the dogs kill me. The GM says I passed the test. Turns out death was some kind of Zen embodiment and now I'm a monk, so I don't need a bow. I told him that I keep waiting for the dogs. Am I overreacting, or are my player just wannabe hardcore? So, I recently got into D&D again after a horrible experience a few years ago, this time as a DM. I'm playing with 5 of my closest friends and we play twice a week, but I start to regret everything honestly. Apologies for mistakes, but English is not my first language. So, in my campaign, they are the chosen ones, and are fighting a few demons. Monsters, all for glory and fame, but they are kind of exaggerating it. Last session, I put them in dangerous terrain. They've never experienced a sandstorm before, since the world is pretty Middle European based. I was hoping for them to react to it, but instead they went sleeping, not even showing some kind of fear or concern for the spectacle. Like, I have never experienced a sandstorm either. but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't stop staring at it and being anxious when I asked if they don't want to look into it closer. They said, dude, we are adventurers, we fear nothing. Okay, cool. The session before, I had an evil mage manipulating them and showing them an alternative reality where everyone they loved was dead or tortured. Again, nothing. They just went on, unfazed. And again the explanation, I'm an adventurer, I'm confident and strong, nothing can scare me. Not even you seeing your mother getting ripped apart by a zombie elf? Okay, cool. Another time, I said they couldn't get a long rest since the environment was harsh. If they fell asleep, the fire would have gone out and they would frozen to death. They wanted a long rest anyways. Because we are strong and powerful, we can handle it, followed by being mad at me when I did not kill them. But gave to levels of exhaustion due to freezing weather and their bodies not getting enough rest because they needed to fight the cold. Maybe that was unfair from my side, but I just wanted a reaction. I wanted a hint of fear, concern, something that wasn't we are though bitches and nothing can kill us. I would have been happy with anything, but no, not even a hint of exhaustion during roleplay. Okay, this is starting to get uncool. My question now is, am I just exaggerating, or are they too far gone in their power fantasy? I get that they want to be the heroes, but I think me making them the chosen ones who are the only people who can destroy the evil is really enough for level 8. I'm honestly starting to lose interest. Edit. Okay, I got it. I made mistakes. I shouldn't have given them an option to kill someone in session 0. It's okay. I understand that I might have another idea of D&D. I'll talk to my players and educate myself on the matter. Thank you.